It's another exciting episode here at On the Path, and we are getting clear around what it means to evolve and become all that God's called us to be. Coming up next, we are speaking with my friend, Dr. Mary Lynn, a practicing clinical psychologist and also podcast host of The Fully Lived Life. And we're going to be talking about her brand new book called REBCOMING, Coming Out of Hiding to Live as Your God-Given Essential Self. Woo! That is a mouthful. We are going to step out of our false narratives and we are going to step in to what God has truly called us to be. And she's going to show us how we can stop the lies, shed the outer layers, and literally become our true, whole, and healed selves. It's an incredible conversation, and if mental health is something that's important to you, then this is the episode for you. Why don't you join me? We can listen together on all podcast platforms. You can watch it in Canada on Yes TV or stream it into the Castle, and in the States you can watch on Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, Pioneer Network, Faith TV, Cross TV, wherever streaming is available. Guys, let's continue to get healthy. I will see you on the path.
You're listening to On the Path podcast with Cheryl Nembhard, brought to you by Fight for Freedom. Follow Cheryl Nembhard on all social media platforms.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of On the Path. I'm so excited to have you with me. As I always say, we are in the classroom of life. We've got incredible teachers that are illuminating the path along the way, giving us the tools that we need. We're learning from stories from those who have hit rock bottom and the lessons they've learned along the way. And we're being inspired by the Lord himself, just being given wisdom, inspiration, revelation. And I am so excited to have this teacher in the building. I can honestly say she is a friend of mine. I have watched her journey for years. I cannot wait for you to get to know this guest. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Mary Lynn. Dr. Mary C. Lynn has a PhD and has been practicing clinical psychology for more than 30 years. She is the executive director of Dr. Lynn and Associates, which is a team providing psychotherapy, coaching, consulting services here in Toronto, Canada. She's a wise counselor, very, very true, and a respected speaker. And she can be heard on popular podcasts, The Fully Lived Life, as well as on a number of TV and media shows where she is a regular guest and a voice there, providing insight on mental health. In addition to providing support to leaders, she is a social justice advocate working globally to equip leaders who serve survivors of human trafficking, abuse, and trauma. Would you welcome Dr. Mary Lynn Payphone?
Yay! Oh my gosh, thank you.
Welcome to On the Path, Mary. I am so excited. I believe this is your official first time here, is it not?
It is. I've been really, really looking forward to this. As you said, because we are friends, I feel like we can just have this really honest, authentic, deep, and maybe funny conversation as well. So we'll see how this goes.
Yes,
right? You know a little bit too much about me, so
I love it. We'll only talk about the real good, fun things right now.
Okay, sounds good. Although I have a few things I could say about you.
Yes,
so.
please. Listen, I'm so excited for you in this new phase. You have authored a book, my goodness, called REBCOMING. I cannot wait to get into the title, the subtitle, what it all means. But first of all, I always say that the greatest storytellers have a moment that changed their story in a massive way. And I would love if you would tell us a little bit of the story of Mary.
Wow. I mean, how much time do we have? Well, I am Asian Canadian. I grew up in Canada during a time, 60s and 70s, where racism was big time there. And my way of coping, because I just so wanted to fit in, and my mom did not help us, made us matching polyester outfits, the whole thing, to try to be the kindest, smartest, whitest person I could be. And I think, and that combined with the fact that in our family, we're all supposed to be doctors, lawyers, or engineers. And I absolutely can't stand the sight of blood. So, okay, I'll be a head doctor. So that's kind of the background. But the background to this book, it was 10 years in the making since the last book that I wrote. And I think the time of writing it, thinking about it, was probably one of the most painful times in my life. And it was painful. On surface, it wouldn't seem that way. I was working as a pastor for a very large, wonderful church. I was successfully running a practice, doing a lot of ministry. But I was really, because of the experiences I had in those realms, I was really starting to question my voice. I was really starting to question, do I have a message to say? Which is so funny because I talk a lot. But is it of, essence? Is it important information? And I really struggled with the imposter syndrome. I really struggled with feeling like I didn't fit in, all sorts of things. And it just kind of came to a head. So originally this book was supposed to be written about women in leadership and how we can speak up, stand out, kind of pursue our calling as women. And that just could not emerge from me. And what ended up happening was there was all the racism that was happening against Asians during the time of the pandemic. And it just stirred up all of this unresolved pain that I had, and shame, and recognizing, oh my gosh, I've done everything I could to try to survive that reality. And I lost sight of who I was. And losing sight of who I was, that's why it took so long to undo. Like, how much of it is really me? How much of it is it the person that I project to try to gain approval? And I, through this process, learned to differentiate the difference between I belong versus I fit in. And I long to belong, which is exactly as who I am, versus I have to do whatever it takes to bend myself into a box to try to fit in. So that's kind of like out of the fires of my own personal work, this book just was what emerged from that.
Thank you for sharing that, and I love hearing the process, the journey, and kind of like the core, the genesis of it. But you said something that really pricked my hearing and my interest, and we also know that you're very big on talking about living your authentic life. And stepping out of or being freed from our shadow selves. And you talked about the shame in sort of not being authentic to who you are. What does all of that mean when you talk about like letting go of our shadow selves, not walking in that, not being bound by that? Could you just talk us through a little bit?
Well, I believe that God has implanted in each one of us a very unique, beautiful person, soul, if you want to call it that. I see essential self to try to differentiate, because people use soul all the time or true self all the time. And I wanted it to be very specific to who God has created you to be in an evolving, growing way. So there's your core self, and then there's choices you make out of that essence of who you are. And I believe that if all of us pursue who we really are, we are one tiny aspect of the glory of God. And if all of us, if you think about a Christmas tree with all the lights on there, and all of us was doing our part to shine the glory of God, my gosh, what incredible beauty. But the problem is, along the way, we get told we're not enough, we're too much, or we experience trauma. Or we learn the if-then. If I'm a good girl, then my mom will love me. If I get good marks, then my teacher will approve of me. And as kids, we make all sorts of conclusions about ourselves that may be inaccurate, but it feels so true. So we develop these coping strategies that help us to survive. And they work. That's the problem. It gains us what we think is the fitting in, the approval, or the success, or whatever it is that we think we need. And then it stops working, or it doesn't work nearly as well, and we hit a wall, and we hit a wall, and we hit a wall. And so the shadow self, we start to recognize maybe a lot of what was built up as I was growing up was this shadow self. And I call it shadow self, not false self on purpose, because the problem with false self is like, kick it to the curb, it's awful, we don't want it, reject it. But I say shadow self because I think our shadow self showed up to protect us from pain, from rejection, from our fears, from our insecurities. So if we can recognize that our shadow self is still part of ourselves, but it houses, she houses, or he houses our vulnerable needs, unmet needs, our insecurities, our fears, our unresolved trauma, so that every time she shows up, it's not go away. It's like, oh, what is it that you are trying to tell me? Having compassion for our shadow self, recognizing that she's telling me something that is going on within me, but then not being being controlled by the shadow self and choosing better. What's a better response? And if I'm really aware of all of that, I can much more intentionally choose a better response. It's not this reactive, defensive, shame-driven response that we tend to fall into. So that's sort of a summary of the difference of how I see that. And part of the reason why it took a book, and it will take a lifetime, is it's not like, okay, well, I just want to live out of my essential self and forget it. I will, it's not a step-by-step process. It's this lifelong journey of growth and transformation. And as you know, Cheryl, I mean, you've gone through so much and you've grown through so much as well. It wasn't like just the insight that was enough. You had to apply it. You had to make wiser choices, and you had to do it again and again and again before that character change sunk deeply into you. So that's what this book is basically about.
Goodness. Well, listen, guys, if that is what this book is about, all of you need to grab a copy of Rebecoming, written by my friend, Dr. Mary Seelan. I think it's going to be a very needful book for us as we are on this journey to our authentic, true selves. Speaking of which, too, I've always been just very, very transparently at odds with this sort of idea of where faith and psychology intersect. And I know I'm not alone in all of this. And, I've always believed that our journey to our authentic selves is sort of this faith-based coming into understanding of true identity and who God is, how he sees us, and sort of reconciling that. And you say that, the road to our true authentic self involves psychology, that psychology plays a huge role, in fact. How do you reconcile the two? Where is the space and place that they work best? Please enlighten us.
Such a great question. I believe that science is biblical because science is rooted in how God has created us. Body, mind, soul, emotions, all of those things. And so if we just assume that we are just spirit and we ignore, for example, you have a headache and you ignore it and you ignore it and you ignore it. You finally go and get a test, and that turns out it's a lot more serious than you thought. Faith has a huge component to healing, I agree, but there's also science, and science gave us the capacity to do research and to understand how we can help each other, help ourselves. So psychology is one of those fields, and I have to admit, I already know this. There are quacks out there who believe all sorts of things. So I try very hard to amalgamate the psychology and the faith component, the spiritual component, in a way that is honoring to God, honoring to who Jesus is, honoring to how the scripture teaches us how we should live.
Goodness.
So I think that's probably the best way I can put it together. But yeah, I don't think they're in contradiction at all.
Was there ever a time for you that you found yourself in contradiction of those two things? Did you have to work anything out in terms of your faith walk and beliefs and psychology?
Wow, that's a really good question. Well, I guess the spiritual and the psychological it's one thing to see a physical body. It's very hard to see what's going on inside. So how much of it is spiritually influenced versus psychologically or emotionally influenced? So I've had situations where, on the one hand, I'd be in a prayer meeting and something would be happening, and a lot of people would say, oh, there's something going on that's, dark and demonic or whatever it might be. And I'd be like, because I do have the gift of discernment, and so I can sense it. And it just felt like it feels like something's going on that's more psychotic disorder. And I think if we ignore that and we keep on trying to cast out the psychosis in the client, that to me hurts my heart to see him not get help that could transform his life, because we think we can just pray away. And sometimes we can. I've had incredible experiences where we can. But there's also many times where there's more, because we are a body. And, we're living in a broken world. Our bodies, our minds, our even our brains have gone through changes and different impacts. Some have been healthy and some not so healthy. So I think it just takes a lot of wisdom to navigate all of that. But I don't think we need to be afraid, because God gave us the Holy Spirit to guide us into all truth.
Good. Oh, I love that.
Right. And I think as we keep an attitude of curiosity, and we can disagree with each other, and we can also change our mind. And that's this growth-minded, curious, I want to know about you. I want to know what you know that I can learn from. And I'm not going to make automatic conclusions out of fear. And I think sometimes when new technology or new science or new ideas come about, the response can be fear. And the fear is that, well, you're walking away from God and all he's teaching with some pseudoscience. And so again, for someone who walks those 2 things, 3 things very closely, it's being able to go, let me be curious about it. I'm trusting the Holy Spirit in me to guide me. So I'm going to examine the science behind this particular idea. And I'm going to filter it through what I know about God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and what the scriptures say. And then hopefully, I'm not perfect. I try to keep that in balance, and then I learn from it. And I think God is a God of grace. And if I stray or make mistakes, He'll show me. And that's part, again, like, we don't have to be afraid. And that's the part of journey. Like, we don't have to worry about always doing the right thing, following the right path. In fact, you'll read this book, and it's not a step-by-step path I'm suggesting you follow. A lot of it has to do with personal growth, spiritual growth, all of those things. And sometimes the path will go like this. It'll be all over the place, but growth comes through the mistakes we make or the misjudgments we've made. And how do we learn from that, right?
So I'm so loving this conversation, and I love how you have talked about how it felt for you in your body, how it felt for you in your spirit as you discerned along the way, prayed along the way, checked in with like, what is a spiritual sort of moment happening, and what could be something else, and inviting us to do that as well with ourselves as we go. And another thing I know that, when we talk about being in tune with our bodies, this idea of the body holding the score of trauma, and that we don't check in enough of what's happening with us. And I know particularly fear and shame are like 2 big things that we hold in our body for years, maybe not even aware of how it's affecting our daily lives, how it's showing up in relationships and other things. I'd love if you, because I know that that's a really big sort of passion place for you, helping us unpack how we carry fear and shame. Just walk us through that a little bit.
Sure. I may be a little naive, but I truly believe that there's very few fully evil people. I think everybody is trying to make their way, and they've had experiences that have been difficult, for some traumatic, whether it's at home or elsewhere. And I believe that it affects us, especially as little kids when we don't have any defenses against it. So our body learns, like you say, to keep the score. Every time you get hit physically, you can get a scar, and you go, oh, I got hit here. But emotional wounds can be just as damaging, if not more, because often they're hidden. And so, but our body doesn't forget it. Part of our survival instinct which is a gift from God. He gave us the ability to survive and to thrive. And so if I've been hurt in a particular situation, my brain will say to me, avoid situation in future. And But the problem with that is you don't always face the thing, and that becomes this boogie monster that's far bigger than it really needs to be. Whereas if I face it, and I teach my body that I am safe in the presence of this, the boogie monster becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. Now I'm simplifying it. Psychotherapy around trauma work can take a very long time, but it's really essentially teaching my body to feel safe. And we are emotional beings. 100% of everything that goes on in our life when we're awake is an emotional experience. It goes through our emotional part of our brain first before it even hits the logical part of our brain. So imagine if we have been designed to survive. So if this happens, our body automatically goes, oh, danger, or flee, fight, whatever it might be. That's the response. Well, if you're not aware of it, you're not working on it, then you're just being reactive to things around you, and you feel like a lack of control, and you feel like you have no choice but to. But the reality is, in spite of systematic oppression and racism and all the bad, yucky experiences we can have in the world, we have an agency in how we choose to live our life and the quality of our life and how we choose to serve others. And that comes with the intentionality of pursuing healing. And then, because I don't think this side of heaven will be 100% healed. I wish we were. But I think God is intentional in that because it keeps us dependent on Him. It keeps us walking by faith. And the pain in us is just this reminder of our humanity and perhaps other areas of growth that we will need to continue for the rest of our life.
Goodness. Well, I think this is one of those moments that we can kind of like sort of sit in a full circle kind of at your feet. I would love some tools, if you will. Please help us in this regard. How do we begin to overcome fear and shame? Anything that we can take with us from this conversation?
I think it's giving yourself permission that fear and shame are natural human responses, and that instead of just ignoring it, denying it, acknowledging that I'm feeling afraid right now, or acknowledging that I'm feeling shame right now, and then having the curiosity to ask yourself, what is going on for me? And if you can't discern that, because if it's so hidden, then work with somebody who can help call that shame out. And the more you bring out shame and fear into the light, the less power it actually has over you. And I don't want to simplify the journey, especially if it's so ingrained in you because you've lived a lifetime of so much trauma that just shame and fear are going to be your automatic go-to emotions. But you can. It's like you name it, you understand it, and then you can say, my reaction would normally be to do this, but I'm going to choose a healthier response instead. And I'm also, I think an absolute key thing is self-compassion. Not self-compassion as in selfish self-absorption. I don't mean that at all. But just as you would have compassion for a friend who is hurting, who is struggling, having it for yourself. Because you are a beloved child of God. Like He adores you. And He adores you so much that it would break His heart to think that you would be so unkind to yourself. Yes, our inner critic says so many negative things to us. It hurts His heart every time He hears ourselves telling that to one of His beloved children. So that's the challenge, is to be able to face that. Now, having said that, one of the number one responses to fear and shame is avoidance, because those emotions are so strong, they literally strike at the pain center of our brain. And who wants pain? But the challenge is it is through working through our pain, facing it, that it actually loses its power to cause us so much pain.
Mary, this is off the books. Let me just say this right now, but I know you're good.
No
This
problem.
is off script. I wanna say a phrase because it literally is where we are. I would say is sort of the big C church. It'll become clear in a minute, but we're just watching this sort of implode all around us. I'm going to say a phrase. Just tell me in your brilliant self some things that come up. Whatever's coming up for you, maybe some solutions, anything. Leading while bleeding. Leading while bleeding.
Right.
We are seeing it. We're seeing the effects, the damage, the carnage. Talk to us about that a little bit.
When you're leading while bleeding, your fallback position is absolutely survival. So you go into self-preservation mode because you want to survive that injury. So when you're leading with that, you cannot help but be focused on how this is going to harm me, how this is going to affect me, and then I will react to protect myself. Now, I can justify it, but don't forget, we're 100% emotional beings. And if that is what's happening, you're bleeding, you're unaware of it, you're unaware of how it shapes the way that you become defensive, then you have no space to really consider the needs of those around you, or you have little space. Or if you do, I gotta say it, it is more in line with your image than it is in genuinely helping others. And that's why we are seeing so many things happening. These are real leaders who might have started ministry with a wonderful desire to truly minister, but because of a lack of awareness of their blind spots, of their bleeding, they end up bleeding all over each other and they cause so much damage. But because they're bleeding in self-survival mode, they cannot acknowledge the harm that they're causing to others. And so it's everybody else's fault because they're actually feeling pain. Because it's like they're getting jabbed and not bleeding, and they're getting jabbed. It's because you said that thing that I'm hurting even more. But your bleeding on me caused that interaction to happen. Does that make sense?
Oh my gosh, it does.
Yeah.
And this book is just going to be, I feel like, such an answer, such a help for the time that we're in, where we are watching people leading while bleeding, not acknowledging true hurt, pain, desiring to fit in and conforming to that rather than authenticity and true belonging. What's your hope for the book I know that you went through this beautiful process of it was almost healing to write it, but now that the baby's out there in the world, what's your hope for the book as we read it?
Well, I know you've had books out there and you know it's a scary thing because you are putting your soul out there. My hope is that it's going to sound really cliche, but my hope is that it will truly help people grow, gain greater insight to work towards transformation. And I say work towards because I think it's a lifelong journey. I hope that people will feel encouraged by it because they won't feel alone. I hope that they'll feel seen. Each chapter has a story to start it. And they're not true stories, they're made up stories of client interactions all mixed together. So there's no one that, although you might resonate with some of the stories, and you'll see that I write it with a lot of compassion because I feel for people. I want them to have that level of self-compassion, that level of hope that they can change. I hate seeing people feel stuck, feeling like there's no choice but to white knuckle my way through life. That is not what we're called to as followers of Jesus Christ. We're called to fully live life. We're called to be the best version of ourselves. So that's my ultimate hope. My other hope would be that people wouldn't see this as a book to read quickly and it's a tickety box. Read it, got it, I'm good. It is a book that is to be worked through and probably again and again and again. People jokingly call, whenever I write things, it should always come with a warning label because it's pretty deep stuff. So each chapter has a story, the idea of what to work through, and then digging deeper. These are some things that you can work on. And you can just say, I'm really struggling with imposter syndrome, so I'm just going to go to that chapter, and that's fine. And you could probably get a lot from it. But if you work it from the beginning towards the end, I find that you'll be finding so much more growth. And the other thing I would say is I so long for people, this is not a solitary journey. It can be, but growth comes with vulnerability, with trusted others. And insight has to be worked out in relationship and in community. So if this could be something that a group of friends or a small group would be willing to work through together, I think if people work through it in an honest way, wow, it'll be incredible. And
So good.
and I think if we are working with it in a group, that there is grace, that everyone's at a different point in the journey, and that's totally okay.
Mary, I'm loving this conversation so much. And, I was thinking about your book, chapter 9 in particular. You walk us through this whole idea of the mistakes we make when we confuse fitting in with authentic belonging and some of the damage and, the confusion that happens when we do that. What do you mean when you say that we mistake that sometimes?
Right. Well, it's not like we come into this world and we're told we think you're absolutely adorable and perfect exactly as you are.
Right.
Would that be great?
No.
No, we don't get that. We get feedback, and some of it's fabulous. A lot of times it's critical, and even our parents they give us feedback to help us grow, to be better, to follow rules, all of that. So this is our experience growing up throughout many early stages of our life. So we learn assumptions, and our assumptions are we have to be a certain way to be liked, accepted, or approved of, loved. And we also find that we experience hurts along the way. So then it's not only if I do, then I will be. It's also if I don't do, then I will be. So can I put you on the spot a little bit, Cheryl?
Absolutely.
Yes. So I know you to be this powerful, mega woman. I know you to be so. Yet, what have you learned about that true self in you that you've had to shut down to belong? To fit in, not to belong, to fit in.
So powerful. That is interesting. So you used the word mega, and I started to have a reaction of like, I was uncomfortable. I laughed, which is like a little bit of a defense mechanism, because the reality is that I've had to shrink. I've had to play small to fit in, and I've told myself that is what's needed. Because when I did sort of allow myself to get large, it caused friction and problems and strife and jealousy, and I was threatening, and it was never good.
Mm-hmm. And people also don't try to understand your story.
Right.
They just make assumptions about you. So you have a powerful presence. Therefore, it must be because you want to be in control. Right. Maybe that's not quite the full story. And so for myself, it's a lot of the same thing. As I said earlier, that I grew up in lots of racism. And so I just tried to be the nicest, smartest, because you have to be as a nation, kindest, whitest person that I could possibly be. And it was part of how I survived. And so I often felt like, and also being not just Asian, but female, and female in an evangelical world. So I often felt like I couldn't really speak up. I could go up on stage and speak, but in a group setting or in a meeting, especially if it's like with men as well as women, sometimes I just wouldn't speak up, or I'd be afraid to speak up because I felt like I'd get kicked off the island, basically. And there'd be things that would be said that I frankly didn't agree with, but I grew up being obedient and compliant, and those are the things that you're supposed to do to fit in to your faith community, and also in my culture as well. So it was a lot of undoing to get to this place of going, well, who am I really?
Wow.
And if I'm going to really belong, see, this is partly I'm not going to say my fault, but my own doing. Yeah. Because people have a certain perception of me because I reinforce it by being that good, kind person. And not that I'm saying I'm not, I hope I am, but there are fierce aspects of myself that I hide all the time because I don't think people can take it or they don't want to hear it. So it's those kinds of things that if I can find a space or a relationship where I can be my true self and not feel like I have to self-monitor all the time. And I'm going to make my mistakes because true belonging and finding our true self doesn't mean we don't do not nice things. But it's being able to own it as opposed to, oh, I'm so sorry, but I'm actually not sorry because what I actually said was what I meant to say, but you just couldn't handle it.
This
So,
is, I love that we're having this discussion and we're getting even more and more vulnerable as the minutes go on, because if I can share, which I never ever do, it's just like 5 seasons that I listen. I don't usually say back, but I want to say this for the first time, that I've been so confused in my walk around this topic of authentic self, because my experience is that the world, or my world, wants me for what I can do, but not who I truly
oh,
am. And they
yeah.
love what I can do because it's a God-given gift. I won't even say I do it well. It literally is a gift, and it just comes naturally. And so they're just like, what is that? Let me grab that to build my thing, which I'm fine to do, because I love to help build people's vision. But then there's a point, Marilyn. There's a point where the thing that was so good and shiny and bright actually becomes a threat, or it's not seen in the same way. It's the weirdest thing, where it's like, now it's like, what are you up to, and there's a distrust, and it's just been so weird for me. And so then it's like I don't know what to do. Do I not be good at the thing and just like shine bright, or do I kind of dim it so that I'm not sticking out too much with the gift? Like, thoughts, please.
Yeah, and I think that that's part of our journey towards becoming our God-given essential self. Is it takes courage and it takes discernment and wisdom, because not everybody can handle or ought to handle the fullness of who you are, because if they can't accept that, and you're just having to fit in to get along. And we do that superficially in a lot of relationships. You don't go into a workplace and you're like, look at me, I'm Mary, and you should, whatever. There are times where we have to mask and, certain roles we play. But in our safe relationships, if we can't show up as that true person, then we don't belong. We're just fitting in. But the challenge is, I make a lot of those same assumptions as you. People only want to be with me for what I do for them. They don't actually love me for who I am. It's one of the biggest lies of the enemy. And so, but I perpetuate it, because if I feel at all insecure, I'm just going to do more to help you. And so I never give people or God the chance to outgive me, because I'm going to outgive everybody to make sure that everybody loves me. And then deep down, I feel like, that doesn't feel good, because I made it happen and it doesn't feel authentic, right? So what I've learned with those relationships that are of trust, and that would include my husband and my kids, because they're adults. Oh, don't you love having young
They're
adult
our best
kids?
friends now.
I know, they're so awesome, and they're so honest with us. And also with some close friends where I can push back and say, when you did this, I kind of felt this, and I felt like I couldn't really speak up. And, my husband, for example, he's never walked as a female, so he doesn't know what it's like to be female. So he will say some things or do some things that's just clueless of the fact of how it would feel as a female to have that situation happen. But he's a safe person, because he will listen and he will learn and he'll try to do better, to be sensitive to the thing that I'm trying to share with him. So, this is not a pathway to finding perfect relationships or even perfect me, because this side of heaven, that ain't going to happen. But it's this ongoing hope of growth, hope of learning, hope of our faith getting stronger in the Lord, hope of a greater sense of sureness in who we are and that we are beloved by God. It's that. And so I'm kind of going to give away the end of the book a little bit, hoping that will help people read the book. At the end of the book, I kind of went, well, I kind of want to end the book by just saying the end, because I'm sure those of you who got as far as to the end of the book, you're looking for the answer that's going to fix all my issues, and I'm going to be fully transformed. And I'm sorry, I can't give that to you. So that was kind of like, so it's real life is messy and chaotic, and we go forward and backward and sideways and all those things. But if we have this attitude of, humility, a growth mindset, a desire to learn, desire to hear from others, because they can be sources of data. And that's the thing. I will ask people, what's it like being on the other side of me? And I get good data, and I get some data it's really ouchy, and I get some data that I think comes out of their projection towards me. So again, it takes discernment, but also having friends who are willing to be honest with you. And I've got to honor that they are honest with me, and I've got to take that there's a grain of truth, and maybe more than just a grain of truth in what they're sharing with me.
Gosh, I love this discussion. And as we I feel like we're coming down the mountain here. We've just been on this beautiful journey of learning and rebecoming, which I love. You talk about you just spoke about it too, that beautiful conversation around coming into alignment with our authentic selves, being brave enough to truly be authentic, not dimming down, not shrinking. And this idea of accepting the gifts and how God's made us. Talk to me a little bit about self-acceptance. And you've got this beautiful sort of contrast of how it's very different from self-esteem. Share that a little bit.
Right. Self-acceptance, the gift of it is eyes wide open. So it is accepting our gifts, of which God has given us for sure to shine His glory, to be uniquely doing whatever we're called to do, which, by the way, is a broad range of things that we can do. But self-acceptance also acknowledges that we are human and we have failings and we have weaknesses. And I'm not going to beat myself up for it. I'm going to continue to work on trying to be better in those areas. Whereas the self-esteem movement is always about the best, all our strengths, and also, unfortunately, self-esteem comes at a cost often of putting others down. So for me to feel good about myself, I have to be the winner. For me to feel good about myself, I have to be the best. Well, then how about everybody else? So self-acceptance requires self-compassion and a lot of humility to admit that I got stuff I could work on. But at the same time, I got these really cool gifts and passions, and I don't need to dim that down. I just need to find, with wisdom, the right places for me to be able to shine. The right Christmas tree, maybe. Back to that analogy of the Christmas tree.
Well, I'm just so thankful for who you are and how you show up. And I first of all, I'd love to ask you just, when you wrote this book, Rebecoming, your hope was that it would sort of peel off the layers of all of the falseness of who we are and get to the core of it. Did you see a way that we would process this? Was your hope that it would be a Bible study, or that we would journal along the way? Like, how did you see this sort of like rolling out this healing journey of your book?
Yes. So my ideal process would be, as I said earlier, that people go through the book from beginning to end, and they do it with a group. Doesn't have to be more than one or two people. It could even be one person who you trust enough to be vulnerable, because we do wade through some pretty deep waters. And in the self-reflection questions, it's one thing for you to know it. See, the thing with coming out as our true authentic self requires this risk of vulnerability, this risk of the possibility that you will reject me for saying these things, that you will judge me for saying these things. And if your friends do, that's their bad. But I then learn I can be resilient. I can handle rejection. I can handle judgment. And I don't have to change and shift just to avoid those things, right? So ideally, it gives you both the support of your group, but I suspect there will be challenges that will come through that, because when you're sharing vulnerably, sometimes people don't always respond in the way that's the most loving way. This is just real life. This is life in community, right? And then take as long as you need, because don't rush through the chapters this is not a tickety box exercise, but just if one chapter really strikes at you, stay there as long as you need to. And if you're in a busy season of your life, it's okay to put it aside and then pull it back out when you're ready to get back in. That's my desire. People can use it individually. And like I said, there can be chapters that they can just go, up right now, I'm in this season. That's what I'm going to work on. And that's good enough. And some of the chapters, I have to admit, are quite a bit more work than others. And so those ones you may stay on for a good few months before you move on to the next one.
Well, Dr. Mary Lynn, I want to thank you for being this incredible voice in the kingdom of God of healing, transparency, authenticity, of so beautifully stewarding this tension between faith and psychology so well, and having and giving us that balance, sort of, beautiful grounded space in between that we can live and learn. And I'm so thankful for you. And I just pray this book just explodes across the globe.
Thank
and
you.
that so many people are on the other side can say, I was changed because of this book. So I always finish my conversations, my podcasts with sort of the same closing question. What I love is that the answer is really never repeated. It's amazing. It's been 5 seasons, but I'd love for you to finish this sentence for me in light of our conversation of Rebecoming in your book. What is it time for? What is it time for?
I think it's a time for reconciliation with ourselves, with God, and with each other. And I think if we do the work and do it deeply and well, I have such confidence and faith that would be what would be the result on the other end.
I love it. I'm going to flip it on you.
Okay.
What is it not time for, Mary?
For myself personally, I've had to let go of the performative part, which is that I have to go out there and, try to sell as many copies, speak everywhere, all of that stuff, because it's a slippery slope. And I have to remember that God is the best publicist on the face of the planet, and he'll get the book into the hands that are meant to be. Huge. And success is not about the numbers of how many books I sell. And I have to talk myself through that all the time because the pressure to perform, to succeed is high. So that's what it's not meant to be. It's not meant to be used as a club, as in I'm going to club you over the head with it and say, hey, you need to read this book and you need to grow because you are living out of your shadow self. Because this has to be a very, very personal decision to invest in the work of becoming your truest, most beautiful, God-reflecting self. It can't be done for you. It can't be told that you need to do it. So that would be what it's not.
And in true form, which you don't know, you share vulnerably from your own life, but you actually gave us the lesson for us as well, which is that it's not time for performance for anyone. It's time to drop the mask, to be authentic, to reject and almost like take a stand against pressures to perform. Brilliant. Oh my goodness. Well, it's just been such a joy to have you, Dr. Mary Lynn. As on the path, I've been waiting for this moment, and congratulations on Rebecoming. How can we track with you, listen to the things that you're teaching and speaking about? Give us all the things.
Yeah. So my personal website is drmary.com. And Mary, by the way, I guess it will probably be on your podcast written somewhere, but it's spelt Merry, like as in Christmas. And on there, you will have access to different things that my podcast, YouTube videos, different things like that.
And your podcast is called again?
The Fully Lived
Beautiful.
Life, which was the name of my first book, actually. So that's kind of how we started it.
Love it. And on Instagram, where can we find you?
Dr. Mary Lynn. Hashtag Dr. Mary Lynn.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being on the path. What a joy. Guys, I hope you get this book, Rebecoming, anywhere books are sold. And we'd love for you to do this in community. I think that that's going to be a really powerful discussion that you're going to have. Do it with your best friends. Do it with your girls. Do it with guys. Just get the book in your hands and let's keep growing into our authentic selves. God bless you, Mary Lynn.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Wow. I want to thank Mary Lynn for coming. This conversation was beyond needed for me. I'm still a work in progress, as we all are. And I just find that healing is something that takes time. We are continually pulling and peeling those layers off and asking God to heal the brokenness from our past, from our wounds, from things said and done or not said and done. Life is full of punctures, and all that we need is the healing love of Jesus. I pray that you find that today, a little bit of that today, as you've listened to this conversation. I hope that your heart is encouraged. Until then, keep living, keep learning, keep loving, and I'll say keep healing, and I will see you on the path.
Thank you for listening to On the Path podcast with Cheryl Nembhard. Please like, download, and subscribe. This has been an Exousia Media production.